Firefighters of Reddit. What was your worst that's totally arson moment when you got a call? Our dad jokes. It's like an alien who was pretending to be human overheard some guys in a bar talking about how dudes just love porn that's super hot. This thread was made for me. My very first scene. The owners were acting super shady from the very beginning. They claimed that all of the clothes in their house, their pictures, and their TV had been stolen by the crackhead neighbors after the fire, in a terrible attempt to cover up the fact they'd moved all of their shit out before setting the house on fire. But the real kicker was the fireproof safe sitting open in the middle of the bedroom floor and the gas can sitting open in the master bedroom closet. Their alibi was buying a canoe approximately 2 hours away at 3 AM. The next was the guy who stood no further than 2 feet from me at all times and turned increasingly white as I found more areas of fire damage that were completely separate from the rest of the fires. He'd gotten drunk and set the house on fire in 5 separate areas. Then there was the guy who set his house on fire in 3 different areas. They were on 3 separate floors. Super nice guy. We were sitting and chatting. I started to take samples of all 3 areas and he looked at me and said, "Man, you've been super cool to me. I set this place on fire. I'm sorry." Then there was the lady who had a legitimate fire on the first floor a few weeks before. She used the insurance money to pay her cousin to do the repairs to the house. Predictably, he used that money to buy weed and vodka. So she decided to have herself another fire in the basement this time. 2 fires in the space of a few months. Red flag number 1. She got 16 bottles of acetone, 1,000 cotton balls, some latex gloves, and a torch. When I first got there, I went down in the basement and found the first area of major burning on top of a bench seat that had absolutely nothing on top of it. Red flag number 2. Unfortunately the basement was full of about 15 inches of water, so I spent the next hour draining the basement. When it drained, I was able to open a cabinet that was full of burned newspapers. Red flag number 3. I then found all 16 bottles of acetone with the caps off. Red flag number 4. I then opened an upper cabinet and found 600 of those cotton balls spread out throughout the cabinet and the smell of acetone nearly dropped me on the spot. Red flag number 5. I then opened the other cabinet right next to that and found a singed cotton ball sitting in a Coke bottle cap with a weird blue plastic around it. Turns out she had tried to do the old arson trick where you fill a latex glove full of gasoline and put it over a candle. Eventually the gas will leak through the latex and boom, you have a good fire going. Well, she filled it with acetone, which does not eat through latex and only melted when the upper layer of smoke became too hot and melted the latex, which put out the cotton ball. Red flag number 6. I then found another latex glove tied off full of acetone. Red flag number 7. And then I talked to her. She was burned in the fire. The fire department found her in the backyard naked and screaming about a dragon. I don't know if any of you have ever tried to light acetone, but it doesn't burn like gasoline. It flashes, and if it flashes close enough to you it will light you on fire. Which it did. She told me the fire attacked her. Turns out she tried to light those 16 bottles of acetone and it flashed up and set her on fire. And that is red flag number 8. I'm sure there are others I'm forgetting. I had an apartment where the ex-boyfriend kicked in the back door and set the apartment on fire and spray painted "F you bitch" on the door. Edit. Oh, I forgot about the guy who swore up and down he had no idea how the fire started. Then told me when I was starting to dig through the bedroom that I would probably find a melted gas can because he knocked it over when he sneezed and the cigarette flew out of his mouth and ignited the gas. Which you might notice is not possible. Bro, by red flag number 3 they start to become neon road signs with arrows. Red flag number 6 and you've hit fireworks, smoke trails, and air horns, along with a studio audience screaming at you telling you it's arson like they're watching Dora the Firefighter. I also like to think one of those car lot wacky waiver dudes inflates at this time and starts wobbling about in jolly fashion. Red flag number 7 and you've got the entire Holy Grail army handing you the case file and yelling "get on with it." Then there was the guy who set his house on fire in 3 different areas. They were on 3 separate floors. Super nice guy. We were sitting and chatting. I started to take samples of all 3 areas and he looked at me and said, "Man, you've been super cool to me. I set this place on fire. I'm sorry. Dang, you must be a really nice person." A few years ago was called to a structure fire. First truck on scene. Heavy smoke visible. I walk up to the house and a guy comes around from the back of the house smoking a cigarette. tells us he doesn't want his house saved. Mask up to make entry, and out of the blue the guy ran up behind me and tried to stab me with a dull steak knife. Turns out he was on meth and his girlfriend had overdosed on heroin in the house, so he torched the place and didn't want us to put the fire out. Thank God for my thick ass bunker coat. Didn't feel a thing and didn't penetrate the coat. Skinny meth head got form tackled by my entire truck company. Was one of my more interesting calls for sure. Meth Logic GF overdosed in house. So, burn it down so I don't get in trouble. Oh fuck, this pesky firefighter is gonna find her. Better stab him in front of everybody. When I was in firefighter training for AmeriCorps, the first story we heard was about a guy that lit 15 acres of woodland on fire just because. When they finally found the dude who started the fire, he was jerking off right by the flames. Edit. Forgot to add, this guy was responsible for numerous fires in the area. To be fair, 15 acres of burning woodland sounds pretty hot. I just treat them like people. I'm not suspicious or accusatory. I just listen to what they have to say and empathize. Works fairly often. Edit. That is my only confession for arson so far. I have had people tell me they were smoking or cooking or whatever other thing they were actually doing. A few years ago, my house was set on fire by a jealous ex-husband of my now wife. As a volunteer FF, I was railroaded by investigators until he confessed to multiple people and was arrested. I was pulled off the job for 18 weeks. My name made a mockery, dragged through the mud in the news, etc. Those investigators never apologized. I was nearly killed in this fire. My family was in danger, and we lost legitimately everything we owned. Glad to see you are like this. I hate investigators like this. You'll never get anywhere, and if you're wrong, you've ruined someone's life. I'm not about to falsely accuse someone and then be wrong. Everyone is wrong eventually, and I want to have all the facts before I go around throwing accusations. Plus, if you're nice to people, they're more likely to talk to you and will start to spill more information. Also, I'm really sorry that happened to you. Hey, I've never encountered a fire investigator before. I imagine most of your work is straightforward, though probably not as straightforward as these idiots. There was that case in Texas where the father, Cameron Todd Willingham, was put to death for arson that killed his 3 young daughters. The fire investigators at trial thought he saw telltale signs of accelerant use. Later assessments, based on more advanced forensics, have argued that actually those puddle burn patterns do not necessarily indicate accelerant use, that they could have been caused by the fire burning fast and hot for other reasons. That is a flash over Wikipedia web page, as seen in the famous Lime Street fire. Wikipedia web page. Investigation. Here's the Wikipedia article on the executed man, Cameron Todd Willingham. Wikipedia web page. Here's the New Yorker article, which is how I first heard of the case. Trial by fire. Did Texas execute an innocent man? New Yorker web page. He was executed back in 2004, and the New Yorker story is almost a decade old, but the case has clearly stuck with me. Do you have thoughts about this case? Is it something that's discussed among fire investigators? Oh, I have thoughts about it. None of them good. It was a shit investigation from the very beginning. None of the conclusions could be supported. He was wrongly charged. It's an example of what not to do in basically every class I've ever been in for fire investigation. Also, all of the shit that they did in that case has been beaten out of the industry by the court system and better investigators. Username checks out. Removed. Firefighter in a small casino town in Nevada got a call for a fire on the 3rd floor of a casino hotel. This casino failed inspections every year. Someone had checked in under a false name, dumped a can of gasoline on the bed, and started a fire. Luckily, the sprinkler system took care of most of it. A good portion of the 3rd floor hallway was flooded, but none of the safety doors closed. No audible alarms went off, and lights only went off in the room where the fire started. None of the people staying in the rooms on either side had any idea what had happened. One was quite surprised to find us in full gear when he left his room to go gamble. There were no personal effects in the room. We never found out why this guy torched the bed, and to my knowledge he was never identified or located after the incident. Small casino town in Nevada. Genuine question. Is this a joke and you're talking about Las Vegas, or are there other casino towns? Edit till. Thanks. Gambling is legal throughout the state. Lots of little towns in between Vegas and Reno. A trailer that a dead body had been found in earlier accidentally caught fire when the investigation stopped for the night so the officers could rest. Another one. The owner was a notorious drug dealer and her house was up in flames. She never made anything inside of the house, but she did stash drugs there. When the house of a drug dealer burns down, it's always arson most of the time. Unless it's meth. Always most of the time. 60% of the time, it's arson every time. Firefighter in New England. We had a fire at house that was undergoing renovations. Earlier that day EMS had transported the elderly father to the hospital after a fall. We get there that afternoon and the house is ripping. Ends up being a total lose. Fast forward 7 months and the son who lived with the father had transformed the former chicken coop on the property into a living space where he was now living. Now in the middle of the night this building also catches fire. The son was still on scene when we got there, told the officer where the fire was and then promptly got in his car and left the scene to go visit his elderly father, who was apparently staying at a nearby hotel. At 3 in the morning, our fire marshals have determined they were both accidental fires, but there are too many fishy statements going around, and now the guy has their RV on the same property and is rebuilding both the house and chicken cooperative. Suddenly, the RV catches fire. Very startled chicken guiltily hides book of matches. Okay, I've posted this before, but it's so perfect here. Why I now look forward to being called to jury duty. Condensed, because this took more than one stroke today. It was 30 years ago and I still hope to see it like again. I'm on jury duty. We have to sit. Charges arson. Supposedly a farmer burned down his barn for insurance money. Prosecutor outlines the case. The farmer moved most of the stuff out of the barn into a second barn over a period of a week. A neighbor in a subdivision that backed up to the farm noticed the unusual activity. Said neighbor being outdoors a lot building a deck on his vacation. Next, the neighbor saw the farmer walking slowly around the outside of the barn pouring something from a blue gas can on the lower part of the barn walls. Farmer goes out of sight to the front of the barn, and flames erupt all along the base of the barn. Neighbor calls 911, but by the time fire department arrives 5 minutes or so later the barn is fully involved and they just act to contain, which is essentially just standing by as they note the nearby ground has been closely mowed, possibly to prevent spread. They note the smell of diesel fuel. Police collect the farmer and take him to station. Fire investigator says definitely arson. Insurance company says the barn was insured. Defendant's lawyer says essentially nothing. Prosecutor calls witnesses. Neighbor confirms that's what he saw. Firemen say flames spread with a rapidity that was out of place even in a wooden barn, and they smelled petroleum. Investigator says there were clear marks on the ground where accelerant burned, and it still smelled of fuel after the fire died down. Police fire investigators said there was virtually nothing in the burned barn, ruined tools or equipment, but that there was a good supply of items in the other barn that appeared to have been recently placed, including some that was sitting on grass that was still green underneath the box. No cross-examination. Defense calls the farmer, and first question asked is let's cut to the chase. Did you burn your barn down? Yup. Why did you do it? It was old and rotten, with termites going to fall down. Not safe. Hectometers. Have you always burned down old farm buildings yet? And my daddy did before me. It's a farm. Are you aware that you need a permit to burn debris in this county? Been doing it that way on this farm since we had dangerous engines. Never had no permit. The fine is up to $50. Oh, wait. I forgot. You are zoned active agriculture, and are exempt. So, no permit needed. But, why didn't you tell any of this to the police? They didn't ask till after they put handcuffs on me and took me to the police station. They told me anything I said would be used against me, and said I had the right to remain silent. And then some lawyer guy came in and told me I was going to prison for insurance fraud. I remember Perry Mason said don't talk to anyone but your lawyer. So I didn't. Did you file an insurance claim? What for? The barn wasn't worth anything in that state, and I moved all the stuff out. I suggested we try to talk them out of this. You said you wanted your day in court. What's up with that? They came on my land, arrested me without telling me what for, told me later it was for arson and insurance fraud, and put that in the papers. All my friends, relatives, and neighbors know about this. They made me look dishonest. I want to make sure everyone knows the real facts. I figure this is better than them just dropping it, and everyone wondering whether they just decided not to send an old man to prison. Defense rests. Wow, barely any attention and I get a magnificent story like this. Thanks a ton. Yes, it's a great story, but if it really made some local headlines there should be some local paper that tells the story too. Otherwise, cynical me says while I'd like to believe it's true it's still on my internet hoax stories list. Then it can be used again as a training exercise for department store Santas. I was telling a story from my hometown like 15 years ago. I went to Google it for shits, and I couldn't find anything. Even if there is a story, it might not be as easy as you think to find it in the papers from old articles. I would go Google a random old memory you have and see what comes up. It was the late 80s. Google didn't even exist, so there's next to zero chance it was put online somewhere. Google in 2019 can index. Now if you started calling newspapers in various towns in farming country someone might be able to narrow it down, then it would just take going to various libraries and reviewing their newspaper archives, and man, I'm glad I was born in the 90s. I've been looking for a story about my mum from the early 80s for years. I know it exists because I once saw the newspaper clipping, but it's long since been lost. I've searched extensively online, and it's not anywhere. I've even tried the National Archives, with no luck. This wasn't a tiny country town newspaper either. It was the Sydney North Shore Times and it was a front page story. It's really not that easy to find old newspaper headlines, especially from 30 plus years ago. Dude, this is an amazing quick read. I love this. Why would they arrest him on the spot? Doesn't he need to try and collect insurance before it's insurance fraud? Probable cause. The police don't decide if he's actually guilty of the crime he's suspected of committing. It is crazy, especially in small towns, how ridiculous it is how quickly it's public record if you're accused of anything, before you're convicted or not. Akin to Bud Dwyer, that guy who shot himself on TV after false allegations. I think he had other stuff going on, but these were way overblown. A lawyer in my town killed himself after he was blasted on local news and papers for all these allegations that turned out to be mostly false. He had some sketchy business dealings, but nowhere near the stuff they smeared him with and caused his family to fall apart and his business to crumble. Similarly, I always wonder why it's even legal to post misdemeanors before convictions in states with a NARD program. I think most states do that. For those unfamiliar, sure this varies by state, but basically big fine, year of probation, lots of community service, and then your first ever misdemeanor can be wiped from your record. I just had to do an FBI background check. There's nothing on my record, yet if I ever ran for a public office and they dug through my town's papers they'd see my name there the week after I got arrested. Not excusing what I did, and it'll never come up again in my life, but I feel bad for when that happens to people where it actually matters. Kinda of defeats the purpose of a forgiveness program, doesn't it? Bud Dwyer was convicted but not yet sentenced of corruption for a sizable shady contract deal. Because of not being sentenced yet, he was still on a technicality the state treasurer when he killed himself. Because he died in office, his wife received the full death benefit for it. He would have lost everything at sentencing. The theory is he killed himself so his wife would have enough money to get by. That's some bang up police work there, fellas. Some things never change, I suppose, lol. The police are not interested in the truth. The lawyer and prosecutor are not interested in the truth. They want open and shut cases to appear tough on crime. The only people invested in the truth coming out are innocent people accused of crimes they didn't commit. This is as expected. If you don't make a claim, you can't be charged with insurance fraud. Period. Full stop. Source: was insurance claim adjuster for 20 years. Edit: I agree. That came off as crotchety. Also, maybe I misread, but I swear the story had him charged with insurance fraud as well as arson. I remember this from before. Great story. Keep on posting it. Was my first shift as a new lieutenant with a platoon of 10. Crackhead and his sister light up 4 houses, a 10-plex, a church and 2 garages all in a span of 30 minutes. $80 drug debt caused $8 million in damages. They confessed to the cops in the morning. What's the significance of the lieutenant platoon? Is that US firefighter terminology? Military terminology as well. Lieutenant is usually a leader, but not necessarily the highest rank. Platoon would be synonymous with squad crew, group of subordinates under that lieutenant. In rural firefighting, We rely on what is known as mutual aid. If one department has a fire, other nearby departments lend a hand. Pretty simple, and very standard for our corridor. Usually when there has a structure fire, 5 total departments will show up. Now, at the most rural edge of our corridor is an all-volunteer department. They are good people and firefighters with good hearts, but with a limited budget. From a small tax base with little corporate income sources, comes limited proficiency. Also, this is a fully volunteer department, and we'll call them VD. Most days the station is not staffed, and many volunteers need to drive in from their houses to the station before gearing up and being ready to roll. Oftentimes when they are called to fire, there is often a few minutes delay before they respond to the page, and then roughly 5-10 minute delay, at best, before they can roll out an engine or tender. Keep in mind, this is during the day. Now that is out of the way, let's get to the fire. The page comes over the station speakers, waking us from sleep at 2:30 in the morning. Volunteer department name here. Stand by for fire tones, followed by their specific department chime. Now everyone is sitting up in bed. If the fire tone is real, we need to get rolling too, because as I mentioned, everyone on duty in the corridor rolls to the fire. Dispatch strikes back up. Confirmed structure fire in the middle of the volunteer department's town. Everyone jumps out of bed, runs to the bay, bunks up, and hops in the engine within about 60-90 seconds from the tune. We are all excited, lights are on, and we begin tearing down the highway in the old girl. Now this is where things begin to get weird. As we are pulling out of the station, the VD's chief gets on the radio. He is already in his car and on scene, within 100 seconds of the tone going out. Odd for that department, but given that this was in the middle of a small town, maybe we can write it off. He gives a picture of the scene. One house appears to have smoke coming out of one side. Given how small these houses are, this means roughly 1/4 of the house is exposed to fire. At this time, all the other departments are chiming in on the radio, informing dispatch of their truck and status en route. Things now begin to take another odd turn. We have 5 additional trucks coming in addition to VD's trucks. However, VD's chief begins to turn them away. Again, not necessarily common, but not unheard of if the fire is under control. What is odd here is that VD's trucks aren't on scene yet. The fire is progressing, and he turns away every truck except my engine, which is coming from the furthest station away, one of the closer fire departments. Let's call them OD. Pikes up on the radio essentially stating, VD, we stated we are coming in our brush engine, not our brush truck. Are you sure? VD chief responded with, I'm sure, you can stand down. Other department, OD responded with, negative, we are 5 minutes out, we will be on scene. I had a quick giggle in the engine. They essentially told VD to fuck off with that noise. We're gonna be there to fight a fucking fire. So this is who is responding at this point. VD with their engine and tender, 3-4 people. Other department with their brush engine and medic, 4 people, and us. Luckily for us we had an overstaffed engine, with every single seat filled, so we were bringing 5 people on one engine. Normally it'd be running 2. By the time we arrive on scene the house is a total loss. We put out the remaining flames and hot spots, and my LT takes over the scene from the VD chief after speaking with our assistant chief again. Uncommon. VD and their chief go home around 4 in the morning, leaving us and OD on scene, as we are doing overhaul, and my LT pulls me aside and asks me a question. Hey, I wanna ask, how do you think this fire started? I shrugged. It was too early to tell, but given the time of year I suggested it could have started with the furnace. Well, let me tell you this, there is no gas or electricity connected to this house. And do you know whose house this is? It's one VD chief's vacant properties which was due to be torn down for a rebuild in a month. So this is where things clicked. Why the VD chief was on scene so fast, why he turned away the apparatus as he did, and why we assumed control of the scene and sent VD and their chief home. Pretty much everyone on the corridor suspects the VD chief burned his own house and worked the scene to make sure it was a total loss. We don't think the rest of the department was in on it. Currently this is still under investigation, and I doubt much will come of it given the burden of proof needed, but the state is involved, and they really don't fuck around with arson here. There are more oddities to this than I let on. but this is a long enough story. I really appreciate you taking your time to type all that out. That's spicy and I now feel like I'm in on a secret. It's rad. Thank you. Edit to @ my dad ran an ANF crew, so I find this extra interesting when I pretend it's about people I know. Where our live accidental arsons usually involve the guilty party paying the entire bill for the emergency response. I'm not a firefighter, but in middle school my family became victims of a serial arsonist in my hometown. I wake up one night to my mom yelling for us to get out of the house. Our really odd neighbors, recluses who did everything at night. We're grilling at 3 in the morning, and saw that our trash cans were engulfed in flames. Investigators show up the next day. Garage is toast. Fire starter material in what's left of the cans. F-150 nearly blew up. The whole package. Come to find out, a ton of fires have been happening in the same manner as ours. Full trash cans up against the garage in the middle of the night. There were no leads, so not much you can do. Fast forward 2 weeks and my family is still in a hotel because repairs are underway. We get a call one morning saying they caught the guy. Apparently he had a knack for cross-dressing, because he was in a woman's dress hiding in a bush a block away from a freshly started fire. Only reason they got him was because they beefed up bike cop patrols throughout the night. No motive. Just had a fetish for flame, I guess. He still lives around the corner from me. Came back after he did time. Pretty wild. Not a firefighter, but I occasionally worked on fire investigation scenes. A few years ago, there was a major gas explosion. One home was leveled and caused extensive damage throughout the entire subdivision. The huge shockwave knocking other homes off their foundations. The closest neighboring homes got the worst of it, one of them also burning down and killing the residents trapped inside. It was a terrible scene. The house at the center of the explosion had luckily been unoccupied when it blew. The owner and her boyfriend were at a casino. Her young daughter was at a sleepover. The cat was being boarded for the weekend. That's unusual. I have cats. I know lots of cat owners. Unless there are serious medical or behavior concerns, nobody puts their cat up for a night out. Kind of weird, but the evidence has to speak for itself. Surveying the house, lots of household items and furniture were still identifiable. It exploded more than it burned. I found several DVDs, but no DVD player or television in the living room area. Ditto for PlayStation games, but no console. No sofa either. Chairs, but no kitchen table. Plenty of random utensils from the kitchen, but not much in the way of dishes or silverware. I do find some clothes, but almost all of them are sized for a very small girl, much younger than the daughter, unless they were things she had outgrown years ago. Eventually we obtained some fairly recent photos of the home from a real estate listing where the owner briefly put it on the market. The photos confirmed that there were multiple large pieces of furniture present at one time that we weren't finding any trace of at the scene. Turns out the boyfriend had a history of insurance scams. He talked the owner into a scheme to blow up the house and collect the payout, and enlisted his brother and some friends to hold on to all of their nice possessions temporarily while they rigged the fireplace gas valve and thermostat to blow. The case took years to wrap up due to the huge amount of evidence collected, multiple defendants, and venue changes, but the boyfriend was convicted. There were lots of things that didn't initially add up to signal this was arson, but the universal "they boarded the cat" reaction caused Snowball the cat to become the unofficial case mascot. When I fought wildland fires, I lived near a place that had the highest arson rate per capita in the US. Every fire I responded to in that area was arson. 22-year-old rookie me thought it was crazy, but it turns out everyone was pretty accustomed to it. When I took the class, my instructor said during slow fire years caterers have been known to start fires. I guess the contracts to feed the camps are huge money. Not a firefighter, but where I grew up there was a beautiful old fire station. Sometime during the Victorian era they had converted an old stone church into a fire station, and so it was a protected historic building. The thing is that when it was converted, horse-drawn fire trucks were all that was available, and the area just had a couple of villages, so that was good enough. The fire brigade couldn't put a full-size truck in the building, and for some reason couldn't sell the land and build another station somewhere else. Oh, and the area had been swallowed up by London, so was way too big an area for one half-size truck. Mysteriously one day whilst the truck was on a call out, the building caught fire. They couldn't spare any trucks from neighboring areas in time, and the local truck couldn't get back. By time the fire was put out, the single-story stone building was declared a complete loss and would have to be torn down. It was ruled an accidental fire. Somehow the firefighters had accidentally filled the building with enough flammable material that it was able to damage thick solid stone walls, and that material accidentally caught fire at the worst possible time as the sprinkler system was accidentally out of order that day. Reminds me of some development near me. Old mental facility closed down decades ago, and about 10 years back a developer decided to put up a bunch of 4-story buildings. A few of the buildings had heritage status and weren't allowed to be torn down, but were allowed to be renovated for condos. Guess which buildings accidentally burned down? Weren't allowed to be torn down, but were allowed to be renovated for condos. Come, live at Condo Asylum. Somehow firemen cooperating in a lie is much cuter than police cooperating in a lie. Actually, I'm not sure that the latter happens much. I get that impression occasionally, but I guess my real point is that this is the nicest incidence of arson I've ever heard of. At least they know how to replace everything that was lost. Somehow firemen cooperating in a lie is much cuter than police cooperating in a lie. I imagine because here it wasn't something where anyone got hurt. When police lie, lives are ruined. I'm not a firefighter, but the story fits, so here goes. My friend's childhood house burned down when he was 15. He had just gotten in from watching grandma's boy at his sister's house and came home to his mom's shit house drunk at the kitchen counter with a bottle of wine. His dad was on the hammock out back, passed out after he snuck away from the crazy drunk to smoke a joint in peace. He's not even in the house a minute and can tell there's something wrong. He said the wall was glowing, like somehow the flames from the fireplace had gotten into the wall and spread, and the house was smokier than it should have been. He gets more into the house and asks his mom why it's so smoky and if she saw the wall, and she pours herself another drink while sitting at the counter like he wasn't there. He freaks out because, well, fuck, the house is on fire. His mom's shit house drunk, and he's 15, so he runs out to try and wake his dad up. He gets him up and they run into the house to try and figure shit out, but it's filling with smoke and you can tell it's about to be a nightmare. His dad tells him to stay outside and brings the mom out there before going in for the dogs before the fire fully took over. Firemen come, put it out eventually. Said it looked to have started in the wall between the fireplace and his room because his bed, which was up against that wall, was toasted at the top and so was that wall. When they can finally get back in the house, he notices a bunch of shit his mom had just bought him at the mall, like clothes he left in his room for school the next day weren't there, even though the chair they were on wasn't burned. His jewelry box that was usually on his nightstand where he kept some family chains and rings and stuff wasn't there. His dad found his wedding album and a few other things in the washer and dryer completely safe from smoke or fire damage. The mom totally burned that house down for the insurance money. She was content to just sit there and get wasted while her husband's childhood home, that he grew up in and wanted to raise his children in, went up in flames. Not myself, but my cousin said they got a guy who had bought a piece of land that had an old house on it and he had decided to tear down the house, but after finding out how much it would cost to bring in someone to demolish and remove what was left, he decided the easiest way to get rid of the house was to set fire to it. So the guy asks the fire department if he can do that and they tell him no because it's dangerous and arson. Couple days after this conversation they get a call from a nearby address about a house on fire and figure out that guy went ahead and set the house on fire. They had to show up and put it out and the police got involved. Turns out later the guy also tried to commit fraud by claiming the house caught fire and tried to collect the money. When we wanted to get rid of the old house on my brother's land, we just called the fire department and let them do a controlled burn. It got us rid of the dangerous old house and they were able to use it as a training exercise. It's amazing how much better things go when you ask nicely. All that was left standing was the chimney, so I think it went pretty well, lol. Those reclusive 3 AM grilling neighbors came in clutch. It's kind of funny because I have done that more times than I would like to admit. When the missus was pregnant with our first kid, I was the manager of the Walmart meat department. I worked a lot on third shift, and had 100% control of any discounts and markdowns in order to ensure we didn't shrink out a lot of our meat because it expired. I took full advantage of this because I'm a meat inside type person, so it was a pretty common thing for me to come home on my lunch break at 2 or come home at 7 AM and grill a burger or something quickly. I'm sure I looked crazy out on my deck at 2 AM. But there's something about grilled food that really makes it better. And being able to grill at 3 AM is like walking around your house naked. It just feels good sometimes because you can. House fully involved in the middle of the night. Neighbor stated that the home's residents were renters who had been evicted earlier that day for non-payment. Not hard to put two and two together. Police car in small town USA was doused in an unidentified fluid and torched. We stopped it before it spread to the building. Police station. It was parked next to. Not a firefighter, but I live in a large city in the UK. It's in the top 5 and we have, as all English cities have, large old building that can't really be used for much but look nice and give the city historical value. A total for 6 of these buildings have burned down in the past few years. The fires always started in the middle of the night, declared random arson by police and usually a few months after they were in the paper because the city planned to demolish retrofit them and permission was denied. It is very clear that the city burns down listed building and builds what they want on the site. The city was also found to be putting, in their own words, blacks, druggies and other undesirables into certain areas to keep them contained. I guess this city is a shithole. I was on jury duty for this one. A guy publicly says that if his girlfriend leaves him he's going to burn their house down. The guy gets into a fight with his girlfriend at a party. She says she's going to leave him. He says if she leaves him he'll burn down their house. She leaves as the middle of the afternoon party ends. 90 seconds later the house is burning furiously. The guy is missing. Fire department concludes that the fire was set. Police start looking for the guy. Some nights the guy shows up at his friend's house for beer and admits that he started the fire. Police keep looking for him. Guys goes to his girlfriend's place and tells her he did it. The guy gets arrested, pleads not guilty. The story I tell here gets told in court. Witnesses telling their part in the story. I did learn a lot about how fires burn as taught to us by the experts. All the defense had was that the RCMP left evidence in their car in sealed cans when they stopped for lunch and in theory could have been tampered with. We the jury stepped out. Took about 2 minutes to conclude he was guilty, then we ordered for coffee and donuts to kill time so it looked like we deliberated for a while. Long story short, but here's the good parts. I responded to a house filled with smoke. We arrived and found a large irregular burn pattern on the carpet in the living room with an odd small pile of stuff in the middle of it. Owners were outside crying. Cops were there. Lots going on. House was filled with thick but lingering smoke. No detectors going off. Quick check and found no fire so we evacuated the smoke. Figured all the batteries were dead and it was a very close call. That's what my report said. Come to find out this 14-year-old girl who lived there had attempted to murder her family. She had gotten up in the middle of the night and taken the batteries out of all the smoke detectors and then poured lighter fluid on the floor in the living room and lit that fucker off. She put a few personal items on the floor to help the fire go and then left, locking the front door behind her. She waited outside and after a half hour when nothing was happening she found herself locked out. She went over to the neighbors and asked for the spare key her family left with them for emergencies. The neighbor walked her back to her house, presumably to tell the girl's parents she had been out at all hours. And when he unlocked the door a bunch of smoke rolled out from the smoldering carpet. Neighbor calls 911 and the girl freaks out. Says it was a mistake and that she didn't mean it. The neighbor is standing there with a WTF look on his face. Cops heard the call for fire and they jumped on it to help. When they arrived this girl was losing her shit in the front yard. Neighbor relays what he heard to the cops. The girl's parents are now up and trying to figure out what was going on. Apparently the girl told the cops she knocked over a lamp or something innocent and then went for a walk. But when they looked inside the front door and saw the makings of a crime scene coupled with her ever-changing and inconsistent story, they put some cuffs on her. Mom is pissed and the girl says that she wishes she would have killed them. While I wasn't there for that moment, I imagine she shook her fist and said and I would have gotten away with it too if it wasn't for those meddling neighbors. I'm an M's not a firefighter. JK, they're cool. We had an absolute shitbag medic at my last job who was fired from 2 different fire departments. It's really hard to get fired from fire. But apparently setting your boat on fire to collect the insurance money so your soon-to-be ex can't demand it in your divorce. 2 separate times, with 2 different soon-to-be ex-wives, will do it.